Today, we're continuing our Greater Than message series, where we've been looking at how we all kind of have these equations that we use for what in life for what we think will lead to happiness. And then we've been looking at how Jesus comes in with like this new math, these new equations for us of you thought this would make you happy, but actually this is what leads to happiness. And it changes everything for us and sets us free from a lot of the things that tend to derail us. So today I want to share with you that there's this one deadly equation when it comes to how we think about our actions that often gets us off on the wrong track in life. Now, we're familiar with deadly equations, right? For many of us, our first encounter with equations and ones that were deadly came in this subject in school called algebra, right? And I know that some of you found these equations deadly because if you drive around, you can see people, there's a bumper sticker that's going around and people have it on their cars, and this is what it says. On the 8th day, the devil said, "Let there be letters in math," right? That was from someone who found algebra to be full of deadly equations in their school experience. Now, there are other actual deadly equations that we're familiar with in life, right? My grandfather worked in Oak Ridge in the plants beginning in 1946. And by the end of his life, he knew just about everybody in Oak Ridge because he was quite the extrovert. So during his final years, I would often go over with him and sit with him for about an hour in the lobby. He would get to the lobby right outside the cafeteria 2-3 hours before dinner was served because he just wanted to make sure he was there when it opened, right? That's kind of priorities he had. Well, all these people would walk by and they would all say hello to him. And then they'd stop and talk. And in sitting with him, I ended up getting to meet some of the top scientists who worked on the Manhattan Project of building components of nuclear bombs during World War II there in Oak Ridge. And it was interesting in meeting these folks who had come up with these equations that led to this vast power humanity had never seen before. They were very well aware that the equations they created were being used by other people. And how those people chose to use them would determine whether those equations ended up being life-giving or whether they were used in ways that were more deadly than maybe anything humanity had imagined before. Now, when it comes to how you view your actions in life, there is an incredibly deadly equation that many of us subscribe to. And this is what it is. You equal the sum of your actions, right? A lot of us think, well, how you act, that's who you are. And that seems so right. It seems so common sense. And one of the reasons why it's so common and why it's so deadly is because the world will praise you for it, right? If you say, well, I should be judged by my actions and I judge others by my actions and their actions, and if you actually live like that, people will say, you're a person of integrity, you're fair, you're just, you're wise. They'll say all that about you. And the thing about it is that you equaling the sum of your actions is almost right, but that equation's wrong, and it's wrong in such a way that it's deadly. In the church, we have a phrase for what it means when you believe that you are equal to the sum of your actions. And that phrase is works righteousness. That it's the belief that you earn love and you earn value through your actions. And in fact, you even can earn salvation that way. The problem and the reason this equation isn't right is because sometimes you can do the wrong thing for the right reason. And sometimes you can do the right thing for the wrong reason. And we were created to be just more than the sum of our external actions. But because it's so close to right, because it makes so much sense, a lot of us succumb to it and it gives us this disease we call works righteousness. And works righteousness produces something very deadly in us. The disease of works righteousness creates a deadly, cold cardiac condition in us, right? A cold heart that's closed off. And if you're wondering if you've contracted this disease, let me tell you its symptoms, okay? Symptoms of cold cardiac condition include, first of all, insecurity. And the way you notice this insecurity is that you find that your happiness resides in you performing well. That on days when you're doing pretty good in your job, in days when you're performing pretty well in your relationships, in those times you feel good about yourself. You're confident, you're strong, you've got it together. But then the moment you start to drop the ball in one of those areas, the moment you start to be the one who messes up, oh man, you're a basket case. Because you looked real secure and confident, but actually you're very insecure because all your confidence came from your performance. And as soon as that was taken away, you didn't have a foundation to rely on. Now, the second symptom of cold cardiac condition is what we call consolation by comparison. This is when your ego's been bruised. Maybe you messed up and you're insecure, so you're feeling really bad about yourself. So how do you try to cheer yourself up? How do you soothe that ego? Well, what you do is you compare yourself to others, and you always compare yourself to others, generally, when you're trying to soothe yourself, to those who you think don't do quite as well as you. And you say, well, I obviously have value. I'm obviously worth a lot because I'm better than them. The problem with that is to be worth something, there has to be people who aren't worth anything, right? Or aren't worth as much as you. And that's a losing game. That's a game you don't want to play. But it gets worse. The final symptom and the most deadly symptom of cold cardiac condition is this: the inability to love unconditionally. The inability to love unconditionally. And here's why you can't love unconditionally. You can't love others unconditionally until you learn to love yourself unconditionally. And you never learn that. So of course you can't love others unconditionally because you haven't loved yourself that way, right? And you've judged everything based on your actions, so you're not familiar with this unconditional love. And you can't love yourself unconditionally until you learn that you're defined by unconditional love, okay? So this is how it works. You can't love others unconditionally until you love yourself unconditionally. You can't love yourself unconditionally until you learn that you're defined by unconditional love. And right now, some of you have a big problem, okay? Right now, the problem some of you have is you're not really sure that should be right. You're hearing that and you say, that sounds nice, preacher. That sounds like something you'd say in church, but I'm not sure that's fair. I'm not sure that's the way how it should really be. Shouldn't I be judged by my actions? Well, listen, your actions are important. And I want you to know we need to talk about how you understand your actions. So here's what I want you to know about your actions. Your actions do not equal the definition of you. The you that is really you, the you that is underneath all your actions and all your motivations, the soul that was created by God in God's own image, is not equal just to your actions. Now, actions are important because they teach us about people and they teach us about ourselves, and we should be discerning and we should be wise and we should be very careful about how we interpret what we learn from our actions and what we learn about others from their actions and their character that is exhibited by those actions. So let me tell you what actions actually are, okay? And if you've gone back to get some more pancakes for breakfast right now, if your kids are bouncing around and jumping on you on the couch, this is a good time to hit pause and make sure you're back, because this is a big deal. Okay, here we go. Here's what your actions are. Your actions are cardiac condition clues. Your actions are cardiac condition clues. That means they are clues as to the condition of your heart. That's what they do. They show us your heart's condition. But your heart's condition is not reliant, or excuse me, your identity is even more than that. Because your identity, the definition of you, comes from Jesus' unconditional love. Jesus' unconditional love is your definition. This person who loved you before you were born, before you drew a breath, before you took a step, who loved you and judged you to be worthy of giving his life for you, that's what defines you. That's what defines who you are underneath every other identity. That's it. And Jesus, he actually told people this, right? People asked him, hey, what is it that makes a person clean or unclean? And he said, it's not what goes into the mouth, it's what comes out, because what comes out in your life shows the condition of your heart. So what our actions are is they are clues to the condition of our hearts, but they don't define us. Your heart can be sick, but that doesn't mean that you are by definition a sick person. That doesn't mean that's who you are. It means you need to get well. Now, I want you to know something about how our actions are affecting ourselves and others right now. We're in a season where we're all under stress, and we're under more stress than we ever thought we'd be, a few months ago, before we could see this pandemic coming. And when you're under stress, what you need to know about your actions is that your best and worst moments will occur more frequently. So you better find someone who loves you during both. You better find someone who loves you at your best and your worst, because you're going to be at your best and your worst more frequently when you're under stress, and we're all under stress right now. Now, once again, some of you are saying, that just doesn't add up. I think you should be loved more when you do better. I think you are fully defined by your actions. Let me tell you, Jesus gets to decide what defines you because he created you. So let me share with you a few things, a few folks from Scripture, a few examples. Luke 19, there's this man named Zacchaeus. You remember him? Wee little man, short guy from that song you sang when I was a kid. He was a tax collector for the Romans in a Jewish area. Everybody hated him. He lived in a town called Jericho. Jesus came to that town. Here's what happened. Luke 19, beginning with verse 5. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So he hurried down and was happy to welcome him. All who saw it began to grumble and said, he has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner. What happens? Jesus looks at Zacchaeus, and the other people only see his external actions that are despicable. And Jesus sees something more there. Now, Zacchaeus, if you know the rest of the story, eventually repents and changes. And you might say, well, Jesus only loved him and believed in him because he knew he could change. Hey, that's not the case. There was another man who had no chance to change, and Jesus still loved him. We turn a few chapters later in Luke to Luke 23, and we find there Jesus hanging on the cross and a thief hanging on the cross beside him. And the thief, who has no way he can ever go back and show that he was really sorry for what he did or make it amends and make it right because he only has a few more hours to live. He looks at Jesus and he says, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And what does Jesus say to him? Today you will be with me in paradise. Jesus saw something much deeper in him than just the sum of his actions. Okay? And then as we go on, we find one more person, one of Jesus' best friends. We turn to Mark 14, and we find Peter and Jesus. And it's amazing that these verses come right together, beginning with verse 29. This is like under stress, you're at your best and you're at your worst. Well, this is Peter's worst and Peter's best right here, right together. Check this out. Peter said to Jesus, even though all become deserters of you, I will not. Jesus said to him, truly I tell you, this day, this very night, before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. But Peter said vehemently, even though I must die with you, I will not deny you. And all of them said the same. And we know the rest of the story, right? That's Peter's worst moment. He's going to deny Jesus. But the next verse 32, they went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, sit here while I pray. He took with him Peter, James, and John, and began to be distressed and agitated. In his greatest moment of need, Jesus took his closest friends with him. And who did he take? He took Peter. Even though he knew Peter was going to deny him. He knew Peter was going to have a moment of weakness. Why is that? Why would he make that choice? Because he saw more in Peter than just that. Okay? He saw beneath what was beneath the actions. He saw the real Peter. And because he saw Peter like that and loved him like that, Peter became a leader and a witness that nobody ever could have imagined. Now, not only do we see this in Jesus' life, and hey, this is a long book. These aren't the only examples of it. I could go on and on and on, but you probably don't want me to do that today. We also see that in examples of human love. And we find that the love of a parent is the closest example Jesus gives us to the pure love of God. And we know this because Jesus calls God Father, right? And what Father is it's not saying like God is a man. We get stuck. Is he teaching us that God has a gender? No. What Father is it's a descriptor of God's love. That this love of a parent is the closest example Jesus gives us to the pure love of God. So he said, if you want to understand God's love, God's unconditional love, think of how a parent loves a child. A parent loves a child before the child can do anything, right? The child, even before the child's born, hasn't taken a breath, not made a step. Parent loves that child. Parent would give anything for that child. That's the unconditional love that defines us. And if you have not allowed your heart, yourself to be defined by this unconditional love, you've probably contracted this disease and this deadly cold cardiac condition. And so here's what I want you to know. If you recognize yourself in some of those symptoms we talked about, you need cardiac rehabilitation. And cardiac rehabilitation requires a heart examination. You have to look inside. You have to look inside your heart. And many of us don't want to do this. A lot of times if I have people and they're struggling in a relationship and one person is talking to me and they're just always blaming the other person. Usually, not always, usually that's because they want to stay angry at the other person because they don't want to look inside and admit there's anything wrong with them. They're scared to look inside because they're scared of what they might find, and they don't realize that if they looked inside, they might find something that was ugly, but that when they did, they would then have the power to open it to Jesus, who can make all things beautiful. I find this, we're about to start our second series in a program we call here at the church, Building Bridges. And it's about how we can work against racism in our society. Our first session was a month or two ago, and we had over 100 people participate, and we hope you'll participate. You can find more about it on concordumc.com/buildingbridges. But as we were preparing for it, I was talking to one of the men who's going to lead it. Dorian McCoy, he works at the University of Tennessee. He's a member of New Covenant Baptist Church. He's leading it along with Frank Cuevos, who's a member here at Concord United Methodist. And Dorian was kind of telling me that, God's given him this gift to just see people and be able to love people from whatever walk of life. So he spends his time trying to help others do the same, because so often we look at each other and we're scared of what we might find. We don't want to get into a conversation because we're scared we might find something in here that we didn't want to find. But in fact, that's the only way we ever get better. So here's the last thing I want you to know today. You cannot be your best until you have been loved at your worst. You can't be. And for those of us who define ourselves by how we perform in our different roles, and if you know me, you know this is kind of one of those weaknesses I have. This is my personality type. I'm a performer. I'm an achiever. And I set goals. I want to get to them. So I define myself by my progress towards those goals so often. But what every performer wants more than performing well is to be loved when they don't. What matters to every player, even more than how many people cheer when they win the game, is how many people hug them when they drop the ball and they lose the game. That's actually what they want, even more than performing well deep down in their souls. I remember this in my own life. I remember in high school playing on the football team, and we were in an important game, and it was close, and it was the fourth quarter, and we were driving down, and we were going to make the winning score, and I went to throw a pass, and I threw it just a little high, and the receiver jumped up, and it hit his hand, and it bounced up in the air, and it was intercepted, and the game was over. I remember coming home that night. My dad was already asleep by the time I got home. And I remember how he heard me come in and he got out of bed. And I remember just crying on his shoulder. And the last time I've cried on my dad's shoulder. Maybe it won't be the last, but to date it is. And I'm so thankful I had a father who didn't tell me about how my mechanics were off and I should have delivered the ball lower, but who allowed me, who cared about me in that moment when I'd lost, not when I'd won. I was with my kids the other week, and we have a family movie night. We were watching a movie, and it's Princess Diaries. I've never seen it. It's a couple decades old, but apparently it's quite popular. My little girl wanted to see it. We watched it. We had one of those unforgettable family moments when during the middle of the movie, my 5-year-old boy looks at me and he goes, "Dad, when I grow up, I do not want to be a princess." I was like, "Don't worry, kid. Got you covered there. We can make sure that does not happen." But I was watching it, and at the end, there's this moment where the princess kind of accepts the responsibility of her role, but it's right after she's really messed up. So she's given a speech to all these people, but she's not dressed for the occasion, and she really looks disheveled. And I'm watching this, and I'm like, hey, this is totally unrealistic. And then I realized this is why this is so popular. This is exactly what everybody wants. To have it obvious that you made a mistake and have people still love you and see potential in you and want you to take responsibility and to use your gifts to bless others. That's what we all want. And some of you might hear about this type of love and this unconditional love, and you might think, I wish I had more people in my life who would love me like that. Well, I do too. But let me tell you, the quickest way to get more people who will love you unconditionally is to learn to love others unconditionally. And the only way to do that is to accept the unconditional love of God for yourself. And you have that opportunity right now. Right now, today. You don't have to wait. In fact, don't wait, because normally if you wait, you won't. But maybe you've known about it and maybe you've strayed from it. Or maybe you've never known about it and this is just mind-blowing today. Either way, you have that opportunity right now. We're going to join in prayer, and I'm going to pray. And I want you today, repeat what I say out loud. I know it might sound silly in your living room, but repeat it out loud so that you know that you weren't just sitting there with your eyes closed. You were praying, you meant it. And I assure you, God will never fail to answer this prayer when you pray it. Let's pray together. Gracious Father, I come before you and I give my life to you. Forgive me for the very worst of my actions and my intentions. Send your Holy Spirit to free me and use me to love others, even as I have been loved by you. Amen.